Hello, YouTube. I want to play a game. The following video you are about to watch contains a review of the horror film franchise known as Saw. These views are that of the reviewer, and are based off his or her personal opinions and interpretations. And there will be several points brought up in this video. I encourage you to watch till the end for the sake of the reviewer. Live or die, the choice is yours.
Hello everyone, my name is Zero Overlord 250, and as that little sound clip just said, I will be reviewing Saw. Now, even if you haven't seen Saw, you've probably heard of it. It's one of the biggest horror franchises, or at least as far as I know it is. And I'm here to do a little bit of a review of the series. Now, just a few things I want to mark out ahead of time. For starters, I literally just finished the entire franchise last Friday. I watched all the movies within the course of 2 or 3 weeks, and so everything's pretty fresh in my mind. Also, I would at this point like to give a bit of a disclaimer that while yes, I did watch all the movies, I did not watch them in order. I did watch them a little bit out of order. Anyway, to the point. So, for starters, before I get into the entire franchise, I just want to start off with a few things as to why I like these movies. For starters, the one thing I especially love about Saw, and what probably many fans enjoy, is John Kramer, the jigsaw killer of the movies. Or the killer for at least the first few movies. That we'll get into a bit later. Also, before I forget, I would like to announce at this point a spoiler warning. There will be some spoilers in this video, so if you haven't seen all the movies or you haven't, if you haven't seen all the movies, I would recommend stopping the video at this point. Otherwise, you were warned. Now then, as I was saying, I find the Saw movies very interesting because of John, because of the philosophy he has. This whole, people can only value their lives when their lives are on the line. And as the movies go to show, that more or less does seem to be true, and it's kind of shocking when you think about it. And plus, I really find the movies fascinating because as they progress, we really do learn more and more about John. I mean, in the first movie, we know next to nothing about him. Heck, we don't even know that he's the infamous killer of the series until the end of the first one. And even then, all we really know is that he has cancer. A point that pretty much is strengthened by the second film. But as the films go further on, we learn more about how he came to kill people, basically. We learn about the issues he had with his wife, who lost a child. We get to see basically just how he develops from an ordinary guy into this, for lack of a better word, or to put it, prophet almost. And so yeah. Another reason I like the Saw movies is for the traps a little bit, but I will confess that beyond the famous reverse bear trap, I I don't really have any favorite traps. They were all just kind of there for the most part, I feel. A point I will get into as my review progresses. Now then, to actually get into the review itself, I am going to go through the films one at a time in the order I feel they are the best in, and progress to what I feel is the least best. So the movie I feel is the best out of them all definitely has to be the first. I think many people could agree with me that the first Saw really is the top of the one. I mean, for me, there's just an unspoken, purity, or not really purity so much as there's this sort of perfection to the first one that, the other films lack. The first film really did have a feel to it that, while the others do try to match, they just don't. And plus, I kind of feel like the twist of the first one where it turns out the killer was actually the dead body we saw at the very beginning of the movie is just, amazing and, timeless. Plus, I feel the best thing about the first one also is that it's more focused on the actual victims. We spend the entire film mainly with Dr. Gordon and Adam, as opposed to later films where we start bouncing between victims and police officers. Granted, there's a little bit of that in the first one, but it's not as abundant, I feel, as in later installments. Plus, I also feel the first is the best because that's where the traps were really at their highest. I mean, such as the famous reverse bear trap I mentioned earlier. It's just, there's a certain gruesome level to the traps in the first one that other films just do not match. Besides the reverse bear trap, the one I wouldn't say is my favorite, but I did find very interesting was the razor wire trap, where the guy had 2 hours, I believe, to find his way through a maze of razor barbed wire. So, yes. That is why I feel the first is number one. Second best, I would have to say, is Saw 3. Now, the reasons I like the third one is because I'm not entirely certain what it is about the third. I just kind of liked it a little bit more than some of the others. But I also think it's because, while preparing for this review, I was thinking the third kind of got it the closest to matching the first. I feel like the third one, we really get more of the victims than the cops, because we spend more time with Jeff than anything. Plus, the third's also interesting because we also get a lot of screen time with John, who's practically on his deathbed, and Amanda, who's been helping him since the first film, although we don't fully know that until the second and third. So yeah, and as for the traps in the third one, the traps were pretty decent. I kind of like how in the end we find out John was testing Amanda because it turns out she was rigging the traps in a way that made them unwinnable. And it's that is not what John wants. And I also find the third one pretty good, and I actually will admit I laughed hysterically at this. How the big twist of the third one is how Dr. Lin is actually the wife of Jeff, who we go throughout the movie with, considering I couldn't help but find it funny because, like, there was no prior indication in the movie that they were related. Like, as far as I could tell, they were two completely individual, separate, not even knowing who each other are characters, and then it turns out they're actually husband and wife. I couldn't help it. I thought that was hysterical, and it's like, what? There was no hint at all to that. The other thing I would also say with the third is, and the ending is, I kind of can't help but also enjoy the ending to the third one, because it's kind of like a big, oops, you lose Jeff, when it's like he kills Jigsaw. And normally in movies, especially horror movies, when you kill like the big bad murderer and all, it's normally a good thing. But here it's like, oops, you killed me, you lose. Guess what? I had your daughter the whole time, and now you're not getting her back. And yeah, I think that's really all that could be said about the third film and why I like it. The next film that I would say is the third best is probably Saw 6. Now then, there's reasons why I, of course, say the 6th is the third best. And that is mainly because of the man we normally follow through his test, William Easton. And I found it kind of interesting because we see in flashbacks and all, William and John weren't all that different in a sense. They both had this, like, idea of saving lives. John through his quote-unquote tests, which are really more death traps, but hey, a test or test, and I guess you could say. Well, William, he actually worked for an insurance company, so his job literally was to help save lives, in a sort of sense. But they differ in their mentality in the sense that while John tries to take things from a more, I guess you could say, human perspective, and focusing more off the emotions, the feelings, and the wills of the people he tries to quote-unquote save, William did it from a more mathematical, like, scientific, like, logical standpoint with his formula, pretty much for who gets covered and who doesn't get covered by insurance. And it's kind of like I like how the whole idea of Saw 6 is kind of like, well, this is your mentality. Now let's see if it actually works. And we see that 9 times out of 10, William makes the choice that goes against his own formula, well, as opposed to it going with it. Another reason I also like the 6th one is because I really like the carousel trap where all the people are like strapped down to the like merry-go-round carousel, and there's like the shotgun. And I just found that a very visually pleasing trap to watch. And it was kind of cool to look at. But other than that, there's not really much else to say in regards to the 6th, so moving on. The 4th one I would say is the best is Saw 2. Now, here's the thing with me and Saw 2. As I said at the beginning of this video, I did not watch the Saw films in order, or sort of. In all honesty, I started with the 1st, then went to the 8th, and then went to the 3rd, and just continued in order from there, and watched the 2nd one last. So I feel my opinions on the 2nd one are a little bit skewed, because by the time I watched it, I already knew how it was going to end. But at the same token, I really feel there's not that much to Saw 2 that's really impressive. Plus, going back to my earlier point, I feel we get a little too much of the cops in Saw 2. It's really a 50-50 split, more or less, maybe even a little bit more on the cop side. And plus, even when we're not focusing on the cop's angle and we're focusing on the actual game in progress, it really isn't all that, for lack of a better way of putting it, it's really not all that serious, the game. I mean, I feel especially in the case of the traps, I feel the traps in Saw 2 weren't really that deadly. I mean, of course, the furnace trap and the, revolver are on the other side of the door were pretty deadly, but besides that, the, pit of needles, the needle pit trap, I believe it's technically called, it wasn't really all that deadly. I mean, heck, Amanda got thrown in there, and she came out pretty much alright. It was a little painful probably taking out the needles afterwards, but even then, those still weren't, fatal wounds. And so, yeah, I just kind of feel like maybe I would have Saw 2 more if I didn't already know how it was going to end, but at the same token, there's really not much to the 2nd one that I could say was good. It just didn't work, I feel. So, as for my 5th favorite, ironically enough, it's Saw 5. Now, I feel the 5th one is, the 5th best because, really, in all honesty, I feel the 5th's the most forgettable. I tried thinking about it for this review, and I realized I really don't remember the 5th at all. Oh, the only 8 things I remember is, in, the whole game in the 5th one, there's 5 people trapped together, and the big shocker is that towards the end of the film, they realize that, all the traps in the movie were designed that all 5 of them could actually survive. The big thing with the 5th one was, revealing The big thing with the 5th one was, Strahm trying to weed out Hoffman as Jigsaw's other accomplice, and it inevitably leads to him getting framed as Jigsaw's other accomplice. And yeah, but all in all, the 5th just wasn't memorable in my mind, and heck, trying to remember it, to talk about it is hard. The one thing I will say, though, is this. The glass coffin trap was a pretty damn cool thing to watch. I will confess, I am a film buff, and I also am going to school as a drama major partially. So anything having to do with movies, theaters, and so on, I find really fascinating, which is why I'm making a review of this stuff. But from a technological standpoint, like, the glass coffin trap was some pretty good cinematic work. And plus, I just love the whole concept of it, of if you get in the box, you're actually safe. Well, if you don't get in the box, you're just going to get crushed by the wall. And it was a pretty neat way of pretty much making it in the confrontation between Hoffman and Strom go down in a way where it's like Hoffman could escape, but Strom won't, and nobody could even bat an eye. Okay, so that's the 5th. The 6th best Saw film, I feel, is Saw 7, also known as Saw 3D. Now, hear me out. I know Saw is 7 or Saw 3D, take your pick of what to call it. I've always known this to be the worst of the Saw films, and I'll agree it's not the best. Like, seriously, the beginning is cheesy, most of the movie is more or less bland, and the traps are also pretty bland, and, like, I believe, like, 3, maybe 4 of the traps, did try just playing off the whole 3D angle. But I feel there is some merit to Saw 7 that were pretty good. For starters, one thing I feel was a big merit was, here we go, was Bobby Dagan, or Dagan. I forgot how to pronounce his last name, but Bobby, the quote-unquote test subject of the film, and I kind of enjoyed watching him go through it, mainly because we find right out from the gate that, like, he lied. Basically, he's saying he's this jigsaw survivor. He even, like, published his self-help book, and he does all this campaigning and stuff to try and basically pass along the same message as Jigsaw, but doing it from the perspective of a survivor, even though he never was in a Jigsaw trap. Which is why he's targeted and forced to kind of go through what he claims he survived, and we see how much he struggles. And it kind of comes full circle for him, and is very ironic considering his final test he needs to pass if he wants to save his wife is to more or less complete the same kind of test he claimed he'd done before. And we see he tries, and he gets so close, only to fail. Oh, and yeah. The other thing I want to say, and this is why I feel Saw 7 is, like, the 6th best of the series, is that what the 7th was... Excuse me, I'm getting a little tongue-tied here. What the 7th was supposed to be was pretty good. The 7th was supposed to be the final movie. And I feel from that standpoint of it supposed to be a conclusion film was actually good, because look at how the 7th ended. It ends, Hoffman has successfully slaughtered all the cops who were looking for him and were involved in the Jigsaw case. He kills Jill Tuck, Jigsaw's wife. He blows up his, lair where he had all the materials for the games. And basically, Dr. Gordon, in fulfilling Jigsaw's last request to him of if anything should happen to Jill, exact revenge on my behalf, locks Hoffman up in the same room Saw 1 takes place in, and pretty much leaves him there to die, much like Adam was left there to die. So the seventh worked at the conclusion because those final moments where everything that has been built up is now gone. We no longer have the stuff to make the games. We now now the one who is enacting these games is gone, and all remnants of everything related to Jigsaw, his wife, the people involved in the case were gone, and the film ends basically coming full circle and reenacting the ending of the first almost. So as a conclusion film, I feel it works fine in the way of kind of closing the book in a way. And then they kind of botched it when they released what I feel is the seventh best film, Saw 8 or Jigsaw, the recent film that came out last October, or as of this recording. Now, as I said, Jigsaw was the second film of the Saw franchise I saw, and I thought it was alright, but as I saw the rest of them and got more into the franchise, I realized it really wasn't all that good. It was actually pretty bad. Considering, I feel at the end of the day, Jigsaw was just a giant reference rehash of events from other Saw movies. For example, the whole, there's a crooked cop is basically like Hoffman, and this guy, Logan Nelson, who we follow throughout the film, we find out at the end, oh my god, he's actually the killer, and he was actually an accomplice to John. It's just so you're basically another Hoffman. And of course, another reason I feel the movie is just a giant reference / homage to the rest of the franchise is they literally do kind of have one point where Logan and is literally with another character in a room full of Jigsaw's old traps and stuff. That's the other thing. The other problem I have with Jigsaw is the traps. They were just really bland, I feel, compared to other traps in the franchise, and heck, really, the traps kind of felt more like, okay, they're traps in a Saw movie, nothing more, nothing less. And, yeah, I just wasn't overly impressed with the Ace as time went on. And so, I really feel it's the worst of the bunch because it doesn't offer anything new. It kind of all feels like it rehashes already done stuff in the franchise, and yeah. Now then, the final Now then, the last and final Saw movie that I feel is the worst is, and you've probably guessed it by this point, Saw 4. Now, let me explain this. The reason why I don't like Saw 4 is because Saw 4 is kind of more like Saw 3 Side B. It basically, for those of you who don't know, Saw 4 basically ends with the ending to Saw 3 just slightly altered. And it pretty much becomes clear by then that the entire film, for the most part, takes place during the events of Saw 3. And it's just like, I feel the fourth was just a giant waste of time. Because, like, the only benefit we get out of the fourth is that we discover Hoffman is the second accomplice to Jigsaw, and that there even was a second accomplice. Other than that, there's really nothing going for the fourth one, and it's like, we spend the entire movie with the police. If memory serves, the fourth one is where the one character being forced to do the quote-unquote test was Officer Riggs, in which he winds up dead in the end anyway, so it's like, what was... I basically just feel, like, there's no point to the fourth one. The only important thing for the fourth one is discovering Hoffman was an accomplice to Jigsaw, which I feel could have easily just been mentioned in the fifth, where he actually starts doing stuff, but yeah, it's just, there's no way you could save it with that. So, that is the entire franchise one at a time. However, the question remains, do we still want to, quote-unquote, play a game and actually bother with the franchise anyway? My honest to God opinion? Yeah. They're pretty good movies, the Saw movies. I feel, as my review has pointed out, I feel there are definitely flaws throughout them, but I feel if you're an easygoing person and you're really just looking for, like, I don't know, something to throw on, like a Saturday evening, go ahead. But personally, I just said what I thought personally. I would also highly recommend that you watch the first. I mean, it's the original Saw. It's practically a classic. And in my opinion, it really is a movie worth watching. As for the rest, watch them if you want. As I said, they have all got a little bit of their merits, some more than others, and yeah. So basically, Saw is a horror franchise that I would recommend to people, and I would highly suggest watching the first if you haven't. That said, this is Hero Overlord 250, and I am ending my review here. So you know what that means? You've watched till the end. And hopefully you survived. If not, too bad. And for the rest of you, game over. Don't forget to like and subscribe.